Hey everybody, Thomas here again with another Mosaic training video, and this one is a pretty exciting one. It's going over the conjugate training plan that I've been hoping to try out for a while. So let's just jump in real quick because this might be a bit of a long one. Okay, so let's just get the basics out of the way first. Nothing terribly new or really all that different from our previous test, which was a linear periodization test. We're going to break this up into 4-week mesocycles, and that includes 3 weeks of, quote, work time, and then 1 week of deload, which is not total rest. It's probably about half capacity in terms of weight or actual, reps, time working. And the big change here is that each week focuses on each aspect that you want to work on. And this is a big change from the linear periodization, which you might remember is very segmented. You have a whole cycle, a whole 3 weeks of just hypertrophy, and then just strength, and just power. So you're just focused during that time. And this one is testing out mixing everything together in the same week and kind of progressively working on all of them at the same time. So the hope here, in terms of benefits, is that we are always, because we're working on everything all the time, we're always improving each aspect of climbing that we want to work on. The problem I found with the linear periodization was that you're really aiming toward this peaking phase where you have, maybe a month of, great climbing shape, but otherwise you're not necessarily in your best climbing shape. And you could be in, pretty, comparatively pretty bad shape. And the other thing that this is attempting to do is avoid the idea of accommodation or plateauing. So the fact that your body gets used to these exercises enough that you stop getting the same benefit for the same stimulus. The thing that gave me a lot of hope is that this structure of training plan has a pretty proven track record in other types of sports. We'll kind of go over the basis for that in a sec, but it's a pretty widely, well-regarded type of training structure. The other piece is that changing up what we're focusing on each day hopefully will help avoid overtraining, which I ran into for sure in the linear periodization. During the strength phase, I definitely got into an overtrained state, and it took quite a while to actually recover from. So that's definitely something to try to avoid. And finally, it feels like, so just, full transparency here, I've actually completed all of my work on this already, and I can tell you after having done it, it feels like much less time dedicated to non-climbing workouts than the linear periodization, even dedicated to the kind of more boring climbing specific workouts like hangboarding. So it's a lot more efficient use of time, I would say. Again, kind of going through the same stuff we did with the linear periodization and nutritional stuff. It's going to be the same idea. I'm just going to try to eat more, essentially, than I do, normally. And most of that is aiming toward a kind of a protein threshold of about, 120, 130 grams of protein a day. You can see here it's all kind of the same. And if you're interested in diving into the nutritional stuff, I am much more kind of practical. I just figure it out once and then kind of put it in the back of my mind. But if you want to go in real deep to nutritional stuff, climbing specific nutritional information, check out the Westside podcast. It goes, it goes as deep as you want for that kind of information. Okay, and again, like we mentioned in the linear periodization, cardio, I'm not going to focus on it here. It's totally fine depending on what you want to do. There's always going to be a balance and a trade-off that you make where your time and your recovery energy is spent in terms of recovering from cardio if you choose to do it, where it could go toward the recovery for your actual climbing work. One of the tricks that the kind of bodybuilder powerlifting world uses is this idea of NEAT, which is, I always forget, it's non-exercise aerobic thermogenesis. Essentially, it is it's very low impact cardio. So the big one is just walking. If you get your 10,000 steps a day or whatever, that is the basis for NEAT, and that is one of the less interfering forms of cardio that's widely used. Okay, so let's go through what climbers have previously talked about when they say conjugate training. Then we'll go through kind of what the quote true, the original, and the more accurate conjugate plan looks like, and then we'll figure out how we might adapt that to climbing. So if you have talked to anybody, if you mention the word conjugate to a climber who has done a lot of training, done a lot of research into training, they might know what you're talking about, but generally what they would think of when they hear conjugate is this kind of it feels more like a concurrent training plan, but you're changing your emphasis each week by changing the number of sessions. So instead of doing like the linear periodization where you have whole blocks, it feels like a little mini linear periodization in each block of 3 weeks or whatever. So the example might be 1 week you want to focus on strength, so you do 2 strength sessions instead of the normal 1. Then the next week you move that extra session over to power, so you're doing 1 strength, 2 power, 1 power endurance. So that was kind of the old way of talking about this conjugate training plan. And I think a lot of people, use that and liked it. It seems like a decent way to avoid accommodation, but still kind of focus and really hit certain things. But I think we can go further with the idea of this real conjugate training. Okay, so the conjugate method was popularized, as far as I know. I'm not, a workout, lifting historian, by the Westside barbell method. So it was proposed and it got pretty widely adapted and pretty quickly adapted and adopted to many different aspects of training. So it was originally created, as far as I know, for powerlifting. It's used by a lot of bodybuilders, obviously a lot of strength work, but also in quite a bit of sport and athletic training. So things like football, soccer, athletics like track, anything that I've found that has a component of training that wants to focus on strength and power. And it's a good way to kind of hit both of those things. And that was one of the reasons that this felt pretty promising to me, is that climbing seems to fit in that kind of category. So their original proposal was that the linear progressive method, which is what we tested last time, was outdated. And I tend to agree with that. They kind of had the same gripes with it that I did, in terms of the things that you work on early. So in our case, that was like hypertrophy and strength, start to degrade pretty quickly, more quickly than the proponents for the linear periodization method might say. So I definitely found that as I was going, my assessments as I was taking them after each block were pretty high. They seemed to be indicating that my work on a specific area, say strength, was working. My strength specific pieces of the assessment were going up, but by the time I was done and I was in my peaking phase, those had already gone back down to essentially my baseline before that. And then the other piece that they talk about quite a bit is this idea of accommodation, which I keep mentioning. And they are proposing that it has more of a detrimental effect than we might think. So the idea of new gains where you're going in, you're making huge gains with a specific lift, but suddenly you plateau because you learn the motion, you learn the technique, and your body gets adapted to that stimulus, and it takes more stimulus each time to get a little bit more gain, and you're getting less and less return on your time investment and effort investment. So that's one thing that they bring up quite a bit. And I noticed when I was kind of planning this out in terms of adapting it to climbing, that even if climbers don't recognize this as a conjugate, they kind of gravitate toward a similar structure. which again is promising. It feels like the people who have been training a really long time, who have tried a lot of stuff, who know what works for them, kind of work toward this structure of training. So that was hopeful as well. Okay, so going into more specifically what they would do in the Westside method, in the like powerlifting specific method, is similar to what we're doing here, 4-week or 5-week cycles with a deload week at the end. Each week they would focus on 4 sessions, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but they have the luxury of this pretty easy upper body, lower body split when it comes to work. So the typical week would be Monday max effort lower body, Tuesday max effort upper body. Then you take a rest day. Then Thursday would be dynamic effort, which is like a power effort for lower body, and then a dynamic effort for the upper body. So it's a pretty simple kind of split and structure that they're putting their week into. And then the final thing is, like we've been trying to advocate for with our training, is that you test at a pretty regular interval. So the other big thing, and one of the things that I think will be the biggest takeaway to this test, is the way that they structure their workout. So they would advocate for, in a workout, they would pick a primary exercise that they are targeting for. So let's say they are doing a strength workout for their lower body. So that might be a squat. They might have a pool of a few different exercises that are pretty similar. Like if you look at the list that they give of the example kind of pool of exercises to choose from, they're pretty similar to the actual squat motion. It's just a slight variation that might work on a different part of the movement, or highlight a different muscle group just by the way that it is kind of modified. So let's say you're doing your squat workout, and today maybe you do like a hack squat or a front squat or something like that. It's not a huge difference from the movement that you're aiming to improve. And then after that, so that would be like maybe 3 to 5 sets of a pretty hard effort. You would choose a couple, only like 2 to 3 of these accessory workouts. And generally, I found that by accessory, it would be like a hypertrophy aimed workout, but also a decent amount of like prehab type things, injury prevention type workouts, or extremely focused things that you might have a personal weakness with. And then finally, they would do some kind of core work basically at the end, which is a pretty common thing. Okay, so how to translate this into a climbing training plan, which is a bit tougher. When I sat down and started to think about this, it's a bit tougher than you might think. So if you kind of break it down, they have their upper-lower split, which is pretty even. Climbing, I would argue, has a split of finger strength specific work, or just finger specific work, and then basically everything else, like overall strength, large muscle group stuff. And those are the two that have very little overlap. As you're working your finger strength, you don't have a lot of overlap with another large muscle group, other than maybe like shoulders and biceps and things for hanging. But anyway, that was the split that I came up with. And the fact that these two are definitely, I would argue, should not be considered kind of equal partners when it comes to climbing training makes it a bit tougher to figure out what our week looks like compared to like the upper-lower split that the Westside method might have. Because I can tell you that from personal experience, one finger strength workout a week is just not enough to make gains there. I think you need a little bit more, and your forearm muscles can take quite a bit more than that and need a little bit more stimulus than that. So instead of trying to split it up like that, I decided to combine every day a finger workout, a set of finger workouts, and a set of kind of large muscle group workouts, but to just sort of truncate them and make it so that it was more time efficient and split it up that way. Okay, so the proposed structure, after having said that, would be that each of these work days would include a primary finger work first. You warm up and everything, of course, but first primary finger work, and that could be a strength workout or a power workout, essentially, contact strength workout. And that would be about I did 5 sets of that. That kind of low rep, high weight, high stimulus type of work. And then after that, immediately would be the finger accessory work. And essentially this was like finger, forearm hypertrophy. And this was one of the things that I think was something I definitely haven't tried before. And I think will be a good takeaway from this is that this does work pretty well. You can do a hard finger strength workout, and the fact that you don't need to be fresh to do a hypertrophy workout and get gains from that, you just have to grind your way through that work, and it works out fine. And then basically we're mirroring that same thing for the large muscle group. After all that stuff is done, we would do large muscle group work, same thing, kind of in the strength range, so 3 sets of 3 to 6 reps, and then after that doing these accessory workouts also, which all are quick, 2 sets in the kind of hypertrophy range of 6 to 12 reps, and then finishing off with a core exercise. Okay, so we'll compare here. As I mentioned before, this is kind of what the powerlifting version of this workout would look like. Monday, you have your upper lower split, then for the max effort, and then later in the week you have your upper lower split for the dynamic effort. And then for the climbing version, what I wound up with was instead of splitting it up that way, we would alternate. So max effort fingerboard, dynamic effort, max effort on Monday, dynamic effort Tuesday, then rest, then max effort, then dynamic effort. And then obviously weekends, either climb outside if you can, or rest. Okay, so like I mentioned before, the workout selection for the Westside method was a little bit, I don't want to call this easier, but they have a very limited set of workouts that they are working toward. If you're a power lifter, you need to deadlift, you need to squat, and you need to bench. And then so like I mentioned before, the primary workouts for those are just kind of slight variations on that might work on specific aspects of that movement. So maybe like your deadlift lockout is struggling, the top portion of your deadlift. So maybe you do, rack lifts where you're starting from a higher position and working with heavier weight, that kind of thing. And then the accessory work afterwards would be, again, kind of either hypertrophy or the sort of injury prevention targeted exercises toward that stuff. And then for, again, converting this to climbing, for the large muscle group work, for the finger stuff, I think it's pretty clear, and a lot of climbers have their preference and have figured out what works for them if you've trained at all. For the large muscle group, I went, instead of trying to kind of follow that idea, I just essentially picked out the aspects of my upper body strength that I thought were lacking and chose workouts that would hit that. So for me, I chose iron cross as something to work toward because that'd be freaking cool to be able to do an iron cross. But also I do find that doing wide moves and like transitioning between wide holds in a shouldery way is something that I encounter a lot, and also feels like I could use some work on. I chose weighted pull-ups. That's a pretty easy one. I think most people would agree that that's helpful for just pulling power in general. Front levers, again, because I enjoy working on them. I feel like they're helpful for body tension. And then deadlifts, because I feel like that posterior chain work is more useful than I thought for maintaining body tension, especially on steep terrain. And then I chose accessories to either help with these when possible, or just sort of antagonist training. And you'll see some of them, it feels like a bit of a grab bag, but there's usually some logic behind it. So let's just go through day by day real quick. Monday, I wanted to get one workout in where I could do it at home if I didn't have time to go to the gym. So that's one of the reasons that I chose the workouts that I did here. The primary workout here is fingerboarding. Not a huge new idea here. Max hangs, I chose to do one arm hangs. So what we've talked about before, 5 to 6 sets of a hang, a little bit under 10 seconds, 7 to 10 seconds, one arm hang, and I just did half crimp. I should probably be doing more open hand and 3-finger drag, but I just chose half crimp because I know that works pretty well for me. And going back to the idea of accommodation and how to avoid that, I wanted to test out rotating edge sizes. So I went between like Beastmaker middle edge, which is about 22 millimeters, to a 20 millimeter edge, and then also a 15 millimeter edge. And basically every week just doing a different edge size. And this was more of a test, and I guess I'll say here that I don't think this was worthwhile. We'll talk about it later, but I think sticking with a single edge, or maybe just switching between two, if you find yourself plateauing, is probably a better way to go. And then immediately after that, I would just do a set of repeaters. So for me, this would be like 7 on, 3 off type repeaters, 6 sets, and I would alternate between half crimp and 3-finger drag. We've talked about this in the previous linear periodization video. It's the same workout. The new thing here is essentially doing it after our strength workout. Then for the large muscle stuff, I would do iron cross work. So again, to have this idea of variation in the movement, I would do either assisted holds, with a band. I would do pulses where you start in the upward position, go kind of as far as you can into the iron cross, and then pull back up. And then I would also do weighted dips, which from what I've read has a pretty good crossover to iron cross strength. And then for the large muscle accessories on this day, I would just do handstand press and some flies. Flies obviously work, kind of similar stuff to iron cross, but handstand press was pretty much purely antagonist training. And then just do some kind of core workout like rollouts or knees to chest, stuff like that. Tuesday I would go into the gym, and for the primary finger workout, so today is a power day, would be a campus board workout. So again, to have this variation in the primary workout, I would rotate between either doing typical max pull-throughs, 1, 5, however you can go. I would rotate between that, doing 1 X1s, I call them that, just starting from match down 1, go as high as you can with one hand and come back to match. Those I found helpful. And then jumping pull-throughs, where you start standing on the ground, with the rung, jump, using your legs, jump to catch an edge, and then kind of continue that motion into the kind of pull up, pull through type of motion that you would when you're campusing. And then for the accessory here, it's not really a hypertrophy work, but I was doing micro edge hangs, essentially to help kind of build up that finger pulp and that finger toughness on really small edges. So it could be considered kind of a prehab, not really injury prevention, but just working on that small edge strength too. And then, so I would only do like 3 sets of that, just a few hangs. And then for the large muscle stuff, this was the weighted pull-up day, so I would alternate between doing actual weighted pull-ups, doing lock-offs, weighted or non, and then doing like assisted one-arm pull-ups. And again, this is the large muscle, the primary work is all in the kind of strength rep range, 3 sets of, a couple reps. And then the large muscle accessory stuff for today was lat pull downs and low rows. So these are more targeted toward that primary exercise too, the weighted pull-up. Thursday was another potential, home workout day if I needed it to be. And instead of doing hangs on this day, I went with no hangs. Again, to kind of mix things up, avoid accommodation. But also, I'm still kind of figuring out how effective these are compared to regular hanging, and whether or not to keep them in or even replace regular max hangs with no hangs. So I would do the typical set of five sets of lifts. I just went with 18 millimeter. I started like the hangboard, going through and rotating edge sizes, but I figured out pretty quickly that that was just kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest. Um, and on this one, I just kind of messed with the load more than anything to avoid the accommodation. And then again, after this, I would do a set of repeaters, exactly the same thing as on Monday. And then the main large muscle work for this day was lever work. So here I would just rotate between basically the progression of front levers, where going between either like the one leg front lever, straddle front lever, or full front lever. And then the accessories here were not really related to the lever at all. It was just kind of mixing in what I could. It was just doing curls and side deltoid raises. And then Friday, I wanted to, I need personally to do more board climbing in general. I feel like I'm bad in it, and I could definitely improve and gain a lot from it. So this was the power day, and board climbing was the one that fit that bill. So I did a kilter board, and it was just basically a limit bouldering workout. I would choose different problems, either in the kind of flash to not to 2 to 3 goes, that range, up to projects that I might take a few weeks to do. And then for the accessory here, I was messing with wrist curls. So using the wrist wrench device that I have a video, like DIY video on, just doing very simple, weighted wrist curls with that. And then the large muscle workout for today, for Friday, was a deadlift. And then the accessory workouts were face pulls and reverse flies. So these are pretty much squarely in the antagonist, injury prevention, that kind of area. All right, so those were all the days. Again, we kind of touched on all this stuff before, but the two big things that I feel like this type of training plan we're attempting to address, and the things that I want to really figure out, how effectively they were addressed here, are being the ability to make things efficient by mixing up or mixing in hypertrophy after strength workout. If that feels like it is doable and maintainable, and obviously beneficial, that could be a pretty big game changer in terms of how you can structure your training plan. And then the other part that I was less sure about was how to avoid this type of accommodation, specifically in climbing training. I've definitely seen it with finger strength training, where you plateau pretty hard, and in climbing it's a bit tough to know how much variation is needed to avoid that accommodation, but also what type of variation. Is it just the load that you're doing? Is that enough of a variety to actually get your body to respond again? Do you need to change edge size? Do you need to change the entire protocol, going from no hangs to hangboard, or even between like max hangs and min edge type training? That's the kind of stuff that is going to be difficult to test all the different permutations, but as one of the questions that I had. Things to watch out for in this one, going into it. I was coming off of that nasty overtraining incident. So I wanted to keep an eye on that, and if I saw it, I was going to just take a quick deload week or a couple weeks. Kind of similar to that, too much fatigue climbing outdoors. Obviously, if you are somebody who climbs outdoors regularly, your aim is probably to get better at outdoor climbing. So if your training is getting in the way of that, and you're not able to project properly, you probably want to kind of rearrange your schedule, or at least back off on one day when you're going to be climbing outside the next day. And then, like we talked about before, plateauing. If we run into that, we can maybe try to mix up the exercises even more than we already have. Okay, and then finally, just wanted to go over our assessment from the previous time and our baseline. Here are the metrics. Here's what we're going to be comparing against when we finish up this whole thing and we do our final assessment. So that's it. I know there's a lot of info. Hopefully it's helpful. We'll know quite a bit more when we do the recap and the final thoughts video on the conjugate plan. But I'm pretty hopeful about this, and I think it could be helpful for a lot of people. So stay tuned for that one, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.